What happens when a brave 7-year-old a lemonade stand and Clint Eastwood cross paths? A story you'll never forget. The summer heat hung heavy in the air, the kind that made the pavement shimmer and sent neighbors scurrying for shade on a quiet suburban street in Santa Clarita, California. Life moved at an unhurried pace. Lawns were neatly trimmed, sprinklers ticked rhythmically, and the scent of freshly cut grass mingled with the faint aroma of barbecue from a few houses down. But for one little girl, this wasn't just another summer day. 7-year-old Emma sat on a small wooden stool, her feet barely touching the ground as she carefully arranged her lemonade stand. It was a simple setup: a folding table covered with a faded checkered cloth, a pitcher of lemonade sweating in the heat, and a small pile of plastic cups stacked neatly to one side. The centerpiece was her homemade sign, a burst of color scrolled in bold, uneven letters: Lemonade for Hope. Emma's determination was evident in every detail, from the way she adjusted the sign to make sure it was visible from the street to the bright smile she flashed at each passing car. But what truly set her apart was her purpose. Unlike other kids selling lemonade to save up for a new toy or a trip to the amusement park, Emma had a far more pressing goal. She was raising money for her own chemotherapy treatments. It wasn't a choice any child should have to make, but Emma had faced more in her 7 years than most people do in a lifetime. Diagnosed with leukemia nearly a year ago, she had spent countless days in hospitals enduring tests, needles, and treatments that left her weak and nauseous. Despite it all, she refused to let her illness dim her spirit. Her mother Claire watched from the porch, her heart aching with a mix of pride and sorrow. Emma's hair, once long and golden, was now cropped short, a testament to the toll of her treatments. Yet there she was, waving enthusiastically at each passerby, her big brown eyes sparkling with a determination far beyond her years. A jogger passed by, glancing curiously at the stand before offering a wave and continuing on. A car slowed briefly, then drove off. Emma didn't seem to mind. She simply adjusted her sign, poured herself a small cup of lemonade, and waited. Her first customer was a neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, who shuffled over with her cane. "How much for a cup, sweetheart?" she asked, her voice warm. "$1," Emma replied with a grin. Mrs. Henderson handed her a $10 bill. "Keep the change," she said softly, her eyes lingering on the words Lemonade for Hope. She patted Emma's hand before making her way back home. Little by little, more neighbors stopped by. Some bought lemonade, others simply dropped a few coins or bills into the mason jar labeled donations. Each interaction brought a new wave of encouragement, but as the day wore on, it became clear that Emma's goal was still far from being met. But Emma wasn't discouraged. She had no way of knowing that today would be the day everything changed, that someone extraordinary was about to walk into her life and turn her small stand into a beacon of hope. Emma's journey had started in the most unexpected way. She had always been the picture of health, a lively little girl who spent her days running barefoot through the yard, climbing trees, and riding her pink bike with the tassels fluttering on the handlebars. She was the kind of kid who filled a room with her laughter, whose imagination seemed boundless as she painted whimsical scenes on scrap pieces of paper. But about a year ago everything changed. It began subtly. Too tired to finish her bike rides, frequent naps after school, and small bruises that seemed to appear out of nowhere. At first her parents thought it was just a phase. "She's probably just growing," her dad Brian had said, though Claire couldn't quite shake the knot of worry growing in her chest. The fever started next, low grade at first, then spiking higher and refusing to break. Emma's appetite dwindled and she began losing weight at an alarming rate. One day Claire noticed that Emma struggled to lift her art supplies, her once energetic little girl now too weak to hold a paintbrush for more than a few minutes. It was then that she knew something was deeply wrong. Claire and Brian took Emma to the pediatrician, hoping for reassurance but preparing for the worst. The waiting room smelled faintly of antiseptic, and the cheerful posters on the walls did little to ease Claire's mounting anxiety. After a whirlwind of tests, blood draws, and a long agonizing wait, the doctor entered the room with a look that confirmed their fears. "Emma has leukemia," he said gently, as though softer words could cushion the blow. Claire's world seemed to tilt. The word hung in the air, heavy and sharp. She reached for Brian's hand, her mind racing with questions and fears. What did this mean for Emma? How bad was it? Could they afford the treatments? Emma didn't fully grasp the gravity of the diagnosis at first, but she could tell something was Wrong. Her parents tried to explain in simple terms, assuring her that they would do everything to make her better, but as the weeks passed, the reality set in. The hospital became her second home. The nurses' familiar faces, she endured round after round of chemotherapy, the harsh treatments taking their toll on her small body. Claire stayed by her side through it all, holding her hand during the worst of it, whispering reassurances as Emma cried through the pain. Brian worked longer hours to keep up with the ever-mounting medical bills. The stress etched into his face even as he tried to stay strong for his family. Despite it all, Emma never lost her spark. She found joy in the little things: a nurse who told silly jokes, a coloring book brought by a visitor, the comforting weight of her favorite blanket. One evening, as she sat cross-legged on the living room floor coloring while her parents talked quietly in the kitchen, she looked up at her mom and said, "What if I did something to help?" Claire knelt down beside her, brushing a strand of hair, what little was left off her forehead. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "What if I sold lemonade?" Emma said, her voice filled with a hopeful innocence that only a child could have. "People like lemonade, maybe they'll buy it to help me." Claire's throat tightened. The simplicity of Emma's idea was both heartbreaking and beautiful. She pulled her daughter into a hug, her voice breaking as she said, "That's a wonderful idea, honey, we'll make it happen." The next day they got to work. Emma sketched out a design for her sign while Claire gathered supplies. The bright colors and bold letters reflected Emma's determination. Despite the pain she endured daily, she poured her heart into every detail, believing with all her might that her small act could make a big difference. Little did she know her lemonade stand would not only help her but would also bring her community together in ways no one could have imagined. The next Saturday morning, Emma's dream of a lemonade stand came to life. The sun rose early, casting long shadows over the neighborhood as Claire helped Emma set up in their driveway. Emma wore her favorite yellow sundress, the one she insisted matched her lemonade. A floppy straw hat shaded her face, and though the treatments had left her pale and tired, her excitement gave her cheeks a rosy glow. They carried out the folding table and covered it with a checkered cloth Claire had found in a storage box. The pitcher of lemonade, made fresh that morning with just the right mix of sugar and lemon, stood proudly in the center, condensation already forming on the glass. Next to it was a neat stack of plastic cups and a mason jar labeled donations, the words carefully written in Emma's shaky but determined handwriting. The sign was Emma's favorite part. She had worked on it all week, using markers and crayons to write "Lemonade for Hope" in bold, colorful letters. Beneath it she had drawn a bright yellow sun and a red heart, the kind only a child could create. Imperfect yet bursting with emotion, they propped it up on an old easel, making sure it was visible to anyone driving by. The first hour was quiet. A jogger passed, giving Emma a friendly wave, but didn't stop. A car slowed as it approached the stand, the driver glancing curiously, but then it drove on. Emma didn't seem discouraged. She adjusted her hat and poured herself a small cup of lemonade, sipping it carefully as she waited. Around mid-morning the first customer arrived. Mrs. Henderson, an elderly woman who lived 2 houses down, shuffled toward the stand with her cane tapping softly against the pavement. "Good morning, Emma," she said, her voice warm and gentle. "Good morning, Mrs. Henderson," Emma replied, her face lighting up. "Would you like some lemonade?" "It's 1 a cup." Mrs. Henderson smiled and pulled a $10 bill from her purse. "I'd love some, sweetheart. Keep the change." "Okay." Emma handed her a cup, her hands trembling slightly. "Thank you so much," she said, her voice filled with genuine gratitude. As Mrs. Henderson walked away, more neighbors began to arrive. A young mom pushing a stroller stopped to buy a cup. Then came a group of kids from Emma's school dragging their parents along. They brought energy and laughter to the stand, chattering excitedly as they bought lemonade and asked Emma about her sign. "It's for my chemo," Emma explained simply. Her honesty was disarming, and more often than not customers would slip an extra bill into the donation jar. Touched by her courage, by noon word had spread. Cars began to pull over, drivers stepping out to buy lemonade and chat with Claire, who was now sitting in a lawn chair nearby. The smell of fresh cut grass and the sound of children's laughter filled the air, but all eyes were on Emma's stand. The highlight of Emma's day came when Mr. Alvarez, the neighborhood mailman, arrived. He was a familiar face, always quick with a joke or a kind word. That day he approached the stand with his usual cheerful grin. "How much for a cup, Emma?" he asked. "Already Pulling out his wallet, "It's $1, Emma replied, pouring a cup and handing it to him. Mr. Alvarez took a sip, smacked his lips dramatically and said, "This is the best lemonade I've ever had. Here's $20. Keep up the good work, kiddo." Emma giggled, her spirits soaring. For the first time in months she felt like more than a girl battling an illness. She was making a difference, one cup of lemonade at a time. The crowd grew steadily throughout the day, and by mid-afternoon the donation jar was almost full. Claire couldn't hide her emotions as she watched her daughter interact with neighbors and strangers alike, her confidence blooming with each kind word and gesture. The day felt like a triumph, but Emma couldn't have imagined what was about to happen next. Someone unexpected was about to arrive, and they would change everything. The sun was high in the sky, casting sharp shadows over the neighborhood as Emma poured another cup of lemonade. The donation jar was nearly overflowing, a mix of crumpled bills and loose change sparkling in the afternoon light. The air hummed with a quiet energy as neighbors came and went, each adding their own small contribution to Emma's stand. Emma, despite the heat, seemed unfazed. She adjusted her straw hat, her small hands gripping the pitcher tightly as she served another customer. Claire watched proudly from her lawn chair, chatting with a neighbor but keeping one eye on her daughter. Then from down the street someone caught Emma's attention. A tall man dressed in a weathered leather jacket and dark jeans was walking slowly toward the stand. His movements were deliberate, his posture relaxed yet purposeful, with his sunglasses shielding his eyes and his grizzled face partially hidden by a shadow. He exuded a quiet confidence that turned a few heads. Emma squinted in his direction, her curiosity piqued. The man wasn't familiar, he wasn't one of the regular joggers or neighbors who often passed by. He stopped a few feet from the stand, scanning the setup with a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Hi there," Emma said brightly, her voice cutting through the quiet hum of the street. "Would you like some lemonade? It's only one a cup." The man crouched slightly, resting his hands on his knees so he could meet her gaze. $1 seems like a bargain," he said, his voice deep and gravelly, carrying the weight of someone who'd lived a lot of life. "What's all this for?" Emma pointed to her sign, her small finger brushing over the colorful words "Lemonade for Hope." "It's for my chemo," she explained simply, her tone matter of fact but laced with a quiet strength. "I'm trying to help my mom and dad so they don't have to worry so much." The man's expression softened. He glanced at the donation jar, then back at Emma. For a moment he seemed to hesitate, as if weighing his next move. Finally he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a checkbook. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked, his pen poised over the paper. "Emma," she replied, blinking up at him. "Well, Emma," he said, scribbling something onto the check, "I think it's time this lemonade stand got the recognition it deserves." He tore the check from the book and handed it to her. Emma unfolded the slip of paper, her small hands trembling slightly as she read the number written on it. Her eyes widened and her mouth fell open. This is 50,000, she exclaimed, her voice barely above a whisper. Claire, who had been watching from a distance, bolted to her feet. 50,000, she repeated, her voice trembling as she rushed to Emma's side. She glanced at the man, her eyes brimming with tears. I don't even know what to say. "Thank you doesn't seem like enough." The man smiled, his rugged features softening. "You've already said it," he replied. "This little girl here, she's the one doing the real work." It was then that someone in the crowd murmured, "Wait a minute, is that Clint Eastwood?" The name rippled through the small group like a spark igniting dry leaves. Phones emerged, whispers turned to gasps, and soon everyone was craning their necks for a better look. Emma looked at him curiously. "Are you famous or something?" she asked, tilting her head. Clint chuckled, crouching again so he could look her in the eyes. "A little bit," he said, his tone light, "but not as famous as you're going to be, Emma." The crowd laughed softly, the tension of the moment breaking into something warm and genuine. Clint reached out and gently patted Emma's shoulder. "You keep doing what you're doing, kiddo. The world could use more people like you." The donation jar was full, the check was written, and yet the encounter was far from over. What Clint Eastwood had just done was only the beginning of the impact he would leave behind. The air buzzed with energy as the realization set in. Clint Eastwood, the legendary actor and filmmaker, was standing at Emma's little lemonade stand. Words spread quickly among the crowd that had gathered, and people began whispering excitedly, some snapping discreet photos or recording videos. Yet Clint seemed entirely unfazed, his focus fixed solely on Emma and her family. Emma stared down at the check in her hands, the bold number printed on it almost too overwhelming to comprehend. 50,000, she murmured, her voice trembling with a Mix of disbelief and awe. Claire crouched beside her daughter, her hands shaking as she gently took the check to verify what her eyes were already telling her. Her breath hitched and tears streamed down her face. This is incredible, she said, her voice breaking. I can't believe this. Clint smiled softly, his weathered face radiating a quiet kindness. It's not about the money, he said, his tone steady. It's about showing this little warrior that she's not alone. She's already done the hard part. She just needed a little push. As if on cue, the crowd broke into applause. Neighbors who had come to buy lemonade began stepping forward, inspired by the gesture they had just witnessed. Mr. Alvarez, the cheerful mailman, was the first to speak up. Emma, he said, pulling a $50 bill from his wallet, I think Clint's got the right idea. Let's make sure you get everything you need. The domino effect was immediate. One by one, people reached into their pockets and purses, pulling out whatever they could spare. Some handed over $20 bills, others dropped crumpled fives and ones into the already full donation jar. A few even offered checks of their own written on the spot. Emma's stand, which had started the day with a modest goal, now felt like the center of something extraordinary. Claire could hardly keep up, tears spilling freely as she thanked each person who stepped forward. Emma, meanwhile, stood behind her lemonade table, her face glowing with gratitude and a bit of wonder. Does this mean I don't have to sell lemonade anymore? Emma asked with a shy giggle, her gaze darting back to Clint. Clint chuckled, the deep timbre of his laughter carrying over the crowd. You don't have to, kid, he said, crouching to meet her eyes again, but something tells me you're going to keep finding ways to make the world a little brighter. It's just who you are. The moment was electric, charged with the kind of hope that feels rare and precious. Someone in the crowd shouted group photo, and within minutes neighbors were huddled together, smiling broadly with Emma and Clint at the center. The picture, snapped by a local photographer, would later go viral, becoming a symbol of how a single act of kindness can inspire an entire community. By the end of the day, the total donations had surpassed $10,000 in cash, not including Clint's check. Emma's modest lemonade stand had turned into a beacon of generosity, drawing out the best in everyone who stopped by. But Clint wasn't done. As the crowd began to disperse, he leaned in close to Claire and said quietly, I've got some friends who'd like to help out too. Don't be surprised if you hear from them in the next few days. Claire, still overwhelmed, nodded, her voice catching as she replied, thank you, you've changed our lives. Clint tipped an imaginary hat to her and stood addressing the small crowd still lingering. You've got a special little girl here, he said, take care of her and keep taking care of each other. With that, he turned and walked away, his leather jacket catching the late afternoon sunlight as he disappeared down the street. The neighborhood watched him go, the weight of what had just happened settling into their hearts. But the story wasn't over. The impact of Clint's generosity and the chain reaction it sparked was about to ripple far beyond this little suburban street. In the days following Clint Eastwood's unexpected visit, Emma's lemonade stand became the talk of Santa Clarita and soon the entire country. Photos and videos of the encounter, taken by neighbors and shared on social media, quickly went viral. News outlets picked up the story, headlines praising the little girl with big dreams and Clint's act of generosity. The image of Emma standing proudly in front of her lemonade stand with her bright sign and radiant smile melted hearts everywhere. At first, Claire and Brian were overwhelmed by the sudden attention. Strangers started showing up at their door with donations, flowers and cards for Emma. The family's mailbox overflowed with envelopes, many of them containing checks and letters of encouragement. One handwritten note sent from a little boy in Kansas read, Dear Emma, I saw your story and wanted to help. I don't have a lot of money, but I hope this too makes a difference. You're so brave. Love, Charlie, age 8. Emma was deeply touched. She carefully placed the letter in a shoebox she'd started filling with all the cards and notes she received, insisting to her mom that they keep every single one. These people are helping me, she said one evening as she carefully stacked the letters. I want to remember them. But the story didn't just inspire individuals, it caught the attention of local businesses and charities. A nearby hospital reached out, offering to cover any remaining medical costs Emma's family might face. A popular lemonade brand sent her a year's supply of their product along with a heartfelt note, Emma, your bravery reminds us of the sweetness of life. Keep inspiring the world. Claire and Brian watched in awe as their once overwhelming burden began to lift the hospital bills that had loomed like a storm cloud over their lives were suddenly being paid off piece by the generosity of strangers. And it wasn't just financial support. Offers to help with meals, transportation and even childcare poured in from the community. The ripple effect of Clint's act of kindness extended far beyond their little neighborhood. Inspired by Emma's story, other children began setting up their own lemonade stands, donating the proceeds to local hospitals and cancer charities. A movement began to take shape with the hashtag #HardLemonadeForHope trending on social media. Stories poured in from across the country, kids raising money for loved ones, communities coming together, and even celebrities stepping forward to make donations in Emma's name. Despite all the attention, Emma remained humble. One evening, as she sat on the living room floor with her parents organizing another pile of letters, she looked up and said, "Do you think we can help other kids like me? Maybe we can do something bigger." Her words sparked an idea. With the extra funds they'd raised, Claire and Brian helped Emma start the Lemonade for Hope Foundation, an initiative dedicated to supporting families struggling with the costs of medical treatments. The foundation's mission was simple: no child should have to choose between fighting for their life and worrying about how to pay for it. The foundation launched quietly, but it didn't stay quiet for long. Within weeks, donations began pouring in from all over the world. Schools organized lemonade stand fundraisers, businesses pledged matching donations, and other communities took inspiration from Emma's story to start their own local efforts. One day, Emma received a package from Clint Eastwood himself. Inside was a framed photo of the two of them at her lemonade stand, along with a handwritten note: "Keep fighting, kid, you're making the world a better place." Emma's eyes sparkled as she read the note aloud, her voice steady despite the emotion that welled in her chest. "I want to make him proud," she said softly, clutching the note to her heart. What had started as a simple lemonade stand had blossomed into a movement, proving that even the smallest acts of kindness can grow into something extraordinary. But for Emma and her family, the journey wasn't just about the generosity they'd received, it was about the new hope they could now give to others. Months after that unforgettable day, life looked a little different. For Emma and her family, the once constant worry etched into Claire and Brian's faces had softened, replaced by a sense of relief they hadn't felt in over a year. The overwhelming medical bills were no longer a shadow hanging over them, thanks to the generosity of neighbors, strangers, and one iconic actor who had stepped forward when they needed it most. Emma's health, while still a work in progress, was improving. Her treatments continued, but with the financial burden lifted, the family could focus on supporting her emotionally and physically. Emma's spirit remained as bright as ever, and her lemonade stand became a cherished memory, not just for their family but for everyone who had been a part of that remarkable day. But the story didn't end there. Emma's foundation, Lemonade for Hope, grew faster than anyone had expected. What began as a small gesture of giving back had blossomed into a national movement. Schools across the country joined in, hosting lemonade fundraisers and teaching kids about the power of kindness. Companies pledged matching donations, and families who had once struggled with medical expenses began to receive help from Emma's initiative. The little girl who had once sat on a stool in her driveway was now an inspiration to thousands. She became a symbol of resilience and compassion, proof that even the smallest voices can create echoes that reach far and wide. One day, during a local event celebrating the foundation's success, Emma stood on a small stage clutching a microphone. With hands still a little shaky but full of confidence, the crowd, a mix of neighbors, volunteers and supporters, watched as she took a deep breath and began to speak. "Hi everyone, I just wanted to say thank you," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Despite her young age, when I started my lemonade stand, I just wanted to help my mom and dad. I didn't think so many people would care, but you did, and now we can help other kids like me, so thank you for believing in me." The applause was thunderous, and as Emma stepped back from the microphone, Claire hugged her tightly, whispering, "You've made me so proud." At the back of the crowd, unnoticed by most, stood Clint Eastwood, dressed casually in a simple jacket and baseball cap. He watched with a small smile, his hands tucked into his pockets. He didn't need recognition or fanfare. He was there to quietly celebrate the little girl who had taken a simple act of generosity and turned it into a force of change. As the event wrapped up, a reporter asked Emma what she had Learned through everything. She thought for a moment before answering. Her words simple but profound. I learned that it doesn't matter how big or small you are, you can always do something to help, and when people help each other, amazing things can happen. Her answer became a rallying cry for the foundation, a message that resonated with people everywhere. Stories began pouring in of kids inspired by Emma to start their own small acts of kindness, from bake sales to car washes, all with the goal of making the world just a little bit brighter. The family never forgot the moment that changed their lives. The day a man in a leather jacket stopped at their lemonade stand and saw the heart behind a simple sign, and as Emma's story continued to inspire, it reminded everyone that even in the darkest times, kindness and hope could light the way forward. If the story moved you, take a moment to think about how you can make a difference, no matter how small it may seem. Share the story, inspire someone else, and remember that every act of kindness, big or small, can ripple out in ways you might never imagine. And if you'd like to hear more stories like Emma's, don't forget to subscribe for more stories of hope, courage and humanity.